It was just another Monday when everything started to fall apart. I was standing in my living room, hands on my hips, staring at the cracks that had begun to snake up the walls. It felt like my house was turning against me, shifting from the comforting home sweet home into something hostile, almost like it was decaying before my eyes. I sighed, frustration bubbling inside me as I scrolled through my phone, searching for a miracle on Facebook Marketplace or one of those community handyman groups. It was then that I spotted the flyer. It was a tacky neon green piece of paper taped to my mailbox. Handyman for hire. The promise was simple, the words barely legible in their bold black scrawl. No questions asked. No references needed. Honestly, it seemed too good to be true. But desperate times call for desperate measures. My place was falling apart, and I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I took the flyer inside, squinting at the phone number, and without overthinking it, sent a quick text. "Hey, I need some work done. Can you come by tomorrow?" The next morning, a knock echoed through my house. I shuffled to the door, expecting a grizzled handyman with paint-splattered jeans and a toolbox. But when I swung it open, there he was, a clown. Not just any clown. He looked like he belonged at a birthday party gone wrong, with a faded red nose, floppy oversized shoes, and a dusty striped jumpsuit. My jaw hung for a second as I tried to compute what I was seeing. He gave me a lazy grin, waving a wrench. "Just finished a gig," he said, his voice casual. "Do handyman work on the side." I should have closed the door right then. Asked him why he was still in costume, maybe even laughed it off and called someone else. But something in his posture, the quiet confidence mixed with disinterest, made me too embarrassed to say anything. I just nodded like a fool and let him inside. The clown headed straight for the kitchen, barely waiting for me to gesture in that direction. Tools clinked in his bag as he muttered something about pipes, squatting down to peek under the sink. 5 minutes later, he looked up, still crouched, his face twisted into something resembling a smile. "Need some cash for supplies," he said. I hesitated, my eyes flicking to his oversized pockets and the strange bulge in one of them. But I handed him a 20, and he left, his clown shoes squeaking with every step. I watched him through the window, a sense of unease settling deep in my chest, as he walked out to God knows where. When he came back, there were no words exchanged. He just got back to work. Minutes later, he was asking for more money, 50 this time. Something cracked under the sink, he claimed, and I didn't question it. I was too stunned to act like anything was wrong. By noon, my kitchen had started to smell like rotten eggs. Water pooled on the floor, spreading across the tile and seeping into the cabinets. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest as I watched him pull at the pipes. Something metallic hissing loudly. I should have told him to leave. Should have said anything. But I just stood there, biting the inside of my cheek, paralyzed by the absurdity of it all. The clown moved on to the bathroom next. Another cash request, another stupid nod from me. I paced around the house, my fingers tapping out frantic messages to friends on Twitter and group chats. "You won't believe what's happening right now. I hired a clown for a handyman." I tried to make light of it, but my anxiety kept rising. The air in the house felt thick, oppressive, like something dark was crouching in the corners, just out of sight. Hours dragged on, and by 6 p.m., I'd had enough. He'd asked for more money, and I was out of cash. I felt like I couldn't breathe, my chest tight and my pulse pounding in my ears. I stormed toward the bathroom, ready to kick him out, but as I pushed the door open, the house fell eerily silent. There he was, sitting on the floor, his back to the bathtub, his head tilted back, and laughter bubbling from his painted lips. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made you smile. It was guttural, echoing in the small space, bouncing off the tiles like it had nowhere else to go. It didn't sound right, like it wasn't coming from him at all, but from the walls, the ceiling, vibrating through the house. My hands trembled as I reached out, ready to drag him out if I had to. But the moment my fingers brushed his shoulder, he dissipated, like smoke, like he was nothing more than a trick of the light. I stumbled back, gasping, my hands suddenly empty, He was gone just like that. I blinked, staring at the empty space where he had been, my bathroom torn apart, the faucet leaking water onto the cracked tiles. I ran downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The house was a mess. Holes in the walls, half-painted surfaces, cabinets yanked from their hinges. I collapsed on the couch, my phone buzzing with notifications. Memes, TikToks, nothing that mattered. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen, my mind looping around the same question. What the hell just happened? The next morning, the flyer was back, taped to my mailbox. Same neon green, same black scrawl, the clown's face printed at the bottom with that lazy grin. My stomach twisted as I ripped it down, crumpling it in my fist. I threw it in the trash, but by afternoon it was taped to my front door again, mocking me. This time, I left it there. The days passed, and it got worse. The house felt like it was alive, groaning and creaking, the walls breathing in and out. Cracks spread like spider webs, faster than I could keep track of. At night, I caught glimpses. A flicker of movement, a shadow at the edge of my vision. And there he was, standing in the living room staring at me, his eyes hollow, his grin wide. I blinked and he was gone. I wasn't sleeping anymore, just lying in bed, scrolling through Facebook, mindlessly liking posts, trying to drown out the gnawing fear that I was losing it. I called Tony, one of my old high school buddies. He was big, dumb, but reliable. He laughed when I told him about the clown. "You gotta lay off the horror flicks, man," he said, but he agreed to come by. He brought beers and we sat in the kitchen, the air tense as we tried to joke about it. I laughed along, even though I could barely keep the fear out of my voice. Tony, being Tony, insisted on checking out the bathroom. We heard his scream moments later, a sharp, terrified sound that sliced through the uneasy calm. We rushed in to find him staring at the mirror, his face pale. "I saw him," he whispered. "In the mirror." We laughed it off, but the look in Tony's eyes told me he wasn't joking. The tension lingered even after they left, and the house felt darker. The walls cracked, and at night, I heard faint laughter, muffled, like it was coming from inside them. I couldn't take it anymore. I found a professional handyman on Yelp, someone with 5-star reviews and a well-worn tool belt. He showed up, took one look at the place, and shook his head. I watched him work, every nerve on edge, expecting the clown to return. The lights flickered, and my stomach dropped. Before I could warn him, the clown appeared, standing right behind the handyman, that grin stretched wide across his face. I screamed, grabbing a wrench and hurling it, but it went straight through, clattering uselessly against the floor. The handyman turned. Confusion etched across his face, but the clown was already gone. "You all right, buddy?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. I forced a smile, nodding, and he packed up his tools, shaking his head as he left. Alone again, the silence of the house swallowed me whole. It was over, I told myself, but deep down, I knew better. And just when I thought I could catch my breath, I found the flyer again, taped to my window. The clown's face stared back at me, his eyes almost alive, his grin mocking. Handyman for hire. And I knew, without a doubt, that I'd never be free of him. Story 2. It was the kind of morning that was supposed to be filled with butterflies and excitement, but instead, Samantha woke up with an uneasy feeling in her gut. The sun barely peeked through the curtains, and the first notification on her phone was from her planner. "Today's the day. Make it perfect." The words made her stomach churn, a reminder of the heavy burden of perfection she had carried for the last year. Today, Samantha was supposed to get married, a day that she and Alex had planned for months, down to the tiniest details. Everything was going to be perfect. It had to be. But the tension started building earlier than she expected. The makeup artist was late. Samantha paced the hotel room, her mother attempting to calm her down while sipping coffee on the edge of the bed. "Maybe it's just traffic, sweetheart. Just breathe," her mom urged, scrolling through her Facebook feed, her glasses perched on her nose. but Samantha could already feel it, like a string about to snap. First it's the makeup, then the dress, and before you know it, the whole thing falls apart, Samantha muttered to herself, her eyes darting to the clock on her phone. She could already imagine the chaos, and her palms were sweating. It wasn't until the photographer arrived that things took an even stranger turn. Samantha heard a knock at the door and signaled her maid of honor, Katie, to get it. But when Katie opened the door, she just stood there, stunned. Samantha looked up from her phone, a knot forming in her throat. The photographer stood there in full clown makeup, white face, big red nose, oversized polka dot bow tie, the whole bit. It looked like a joke, like something out of a prank show. Samantha exchanged a bewildered glance with Katie, who mouthed, "Did you hire a clown?" "No," Samantha snapped, her voice filled with disbelief. "I didn't hire a freaking clown." Her voice wavered, fury bubbling beneath the surface. Everything was supposed to be perfect, and now this clown had walked into her life. Literally. She looked at the photographer, a tall man with a painted grin that stretched a little too wide, and felt her jaw tighten. She was about to send him away when she heard the murmur of guests arriving downstairs. It was too late. She had no time to argue. Not today. She took a deep breath and forced herself to smile. "Let's just get through this," she whispered, as if convincing herself. The clown photographer gave her a nod, an unsettling glint in his eyes. The photo shoot began normally enough, or as normal as it could be with a clown behind the lens. He started giving instructions, asking Samantha and Alex to pose in strange places. He suggested they go behind the venue, near a rusty old dumpster. Samantha furrowed her brow, looking at Alex, who simply shrugged. "I guess it's quirky," Samantha muttered, rolling her eyes. She didn't want to make a scene. She had to remind herself. This was her wedding day, after all. She was supposed to be happy. She smiled, but it felt forced, the edges of her mouth trembling. The clown photographer kept disappearing and reappearing, always with that same grin. It was like he found something funny that no one else could see. Samantha tried to focus on the ceremony, on Alex, on the smiles of her friends and family. But every time she caught sight of the clown, he was looking at her, his eyes never leaving her face. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Something felt wrong. During the reception, she noticed how the clown lingered around her bridesmaids, snapping photos from angles that felt too intimate. His gaze lingered too long on their faces, his smile never faltering. Samantha couldn't take it anymore. She marched up to him, her cheeks flushed with a mix of rage and fear. "Can I see some of the photos?" she demanded. The clown's grin widened, and he chuckled, shaking his head. "They'll be ready after I develop them. Takes time, you know?" Samantha blinked, taken aback. Develop? Who develops photos anymore? She thought, but she swallowed her frustration. She couldn't afford to cause a scene. Not here, not now. The wedding moved along, and Samantha forced herself to focus on Alex, on their first dance, on the laughter echoing through the hall, but she could always feel the clown's eyes on her. Watching, studying. It was like he wasn't just taking pictures, but memorizing her, capturing her in a way that felt invasive. She tried to shake the feeling, to let herself melt into the joy of the day, but her gut wouldn't stop twisting. By the end of the night, Samantha had had enough. She stormed over to the clown, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I want those photos, now!" He just smiled, that painted grin stretching too far, his eyes glinting under the dim reception lights. "They'll be ready soon," he whispered. "You'll see." Samantha's heart skipped a beat, a cold shiver running down her spine. There was something in his voice, something dark and mocking. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but Alex was by her side, his hand on her shoulder, gently pulling her away. "Let it go, Sam," he whispered. "It's over. Let's just go home." She let herself be led away, but she couldn't shake the unease. That night, after they got home, Samantha grabbed her phone, expecting at least some pictures. But there was nothing. No beautiful shots of the ceremony, no candid moments from the reception. Instead, there was a string of selfies, all of the clown, making faces, standing next to their wedding cake, grinning as he loomed behind her bridesmaids, his eyes wide and empty. Samantha's hand shook as she showed Alex, her voice barely a whisper. "What the hell is this?" The next morning, Samantha called the number the clown had given her. It rang and rang, but no one answered. She tried again. Nothing. Panic started to creep in, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't going to let this go. She pulled up the address he had listed on his business card and decided to go find him herself. When she got to the address, it was an empty storefront, the windows dusty and covered in old newspaper. There was no studio, no sign of the clown. It was like he had vanished, taking every memory of her wedding day with him. Samantha's stomach twisted as she stood there staring at the darkened windows. It felt like a nightmare, one she couldn't wake up from. Days passed, and Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She started noticing things. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed off. Her eyes looked hollow, her smile strained. Her shadow moved differently, like it belonged to someone else. Alex tried to reassure her, but the anxiety gnawed at her, eating away at her sanity. One night, while scrolling through her phone, she received a new message. It was a photo of her, taken at the wedding. But it was wrong. The clown was behind her, his painted grin wider than ever, his eyes locked onto hers, even though she was sure he hadn't been in the frame. She showed Alex, her voice cracking, but he just shook his head, worry etched across his face. The photos kept coming. More of her, more of the clown. He was in every shot, even ones she knew she hadn't taken. She tried blocking the number, but the photos kept appearing. Desperation clawed at her. She went to the police, but they brushed her off, telling her it was probably just some sick prank. But Samantha knew better. This wasn't a joke. It was something darker, something that had latched onto her. Determined to find answers, Samantha started digging into the history of the venue. Late one night, she found an old news article about a photographer who had gone missing years ago, a man known for showing up in a clown costume. The case had gone cold, no leads, no body. Samantha's blood ran cold as she read the words, her heart pounding in her ears. It was him. It had to be. The nightmares started soon after. She dreamed of her wedding, but it was twisted. The clown stood at the altar, laughing. Her bridesmaids behind him, their faces pale and lifeless. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing, the sound of his laughter echoing in her ears. One night she heard footsteps in the house. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen, her hands trembling as she crept towards the sound. The footsteps stopped, but she knew she wasn't alone. She turned the corner, and there, on the floor, was a photo. It was of her, standing in her wedding dress, the clown beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his grin stretching impossibly wide. She screamed, dropping the knife, her heart slamming against her ribs. Alex rushed into the room, but by the time he got there, the photo was gone. She was left staring at the empty floor, her mind racing. Alex thought she was losing it. He begged her to see a therapist, but Samantha knew what she had seen. She knew the clown was still out there watching, waiting. The next day, another photo appeared on her phone, this one of their house, taken from the street. She looked at the timestamp. It had been taken just minutes ago. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding, but there was no one there. Desperate, she installed security cameras around the house, hoping to catch him. But the cameras picked up nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone coming or going. And yet, the photos kept coming. The stress was eating her alive. She wasn't sleeping, barely eating. All she could think about was the clown, that painted grin, those eyes that never left her. One night, her phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. She hesitated, her heart in her throat, but she answered. There was nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she heard his voice, soft and menacing. "See you soon." Samantha's blood ran cold. She dropped the phone, running to the front door, making sure it was locked, her hands shaking. Days passed, and the photos stopped. Samantha was on edge, waiting for something to happen. Every creak, every shadow sent her into a panic, but nothing happened. The silence was almost worse. One afternoon, she was walking to her car when she noticed something on the windshield. It was another photo. This one was of her, sleeping in bed, the clown standing at the foot of it, grinning. She confronted Alex, accusing him of playing a sick joke. But he swore he had nothing to do with it. He looked just as scared as she felt. Samantha decided she had to leave. She had to get away from whatever curse this clown had put on her. She started packing, her hands trembling as she shoved clothes into a suitcase. Her phone dinged, and she picked it up, her heart sinking. It was another photo, this one of her standing at the window looking out. The clown was behind her even though she was alone in the house. Terrified, Samantha fled, driving aimlessly through the city, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the clown in the back seat. She checked into a hotel, hoping for some peace, but that night the photos started again. This time, they were of the hotel room. The clown was closer now, almost like he was reaching for her in every shot. The breaking point came when she received a video. It was of her wedding day. The guests were frozen, their faces blank, and the clown stood in the center, staring directly at the camera. His voice, barely a whisper, echoed through the silence. "I'll never leave." Samantha knew then that there was no escaping him. No matter where she went, he would follow. He had marked her, claimed her, and as she stared at the final photo of her standing alone at the altar, the clown beside her, his painted grin stretched impossibly wide, she finally understood. He had always been there, watching, and he always would be.